I never expected that a quiet evening with a cup of tea and the soft glow of sunset on my porch would be the moment my life took an entirely different turn. My name is Evelyn, 58, living alone after losing my husband many years ago. I thought I had made peace with solitude until my neighbor, Andrew, knocked on my door with an unexpected request. I need your help, but it's not just a small favor. From a simple plea, I stepped into a journey of healing, not just for someone else, but for myself. What about you? Has a stranger ever changed your life in the gentlest, most unexpected way? Feel free to share your experiences if you're comfortable. Evelyn never thought she'd grow used to the silence, but 5 years after her husband passed, that quiet had become an inseparable part of her life. At 56, she lived alone in a small wooden house tucked into a quiet suburban neighborhood. The house, built nearly 30 years ago by the couple, had once been filled with laughter, cozy dinners, and weekend mornings scented with fresh baked pastries. Now everything remained just as it was: the old oak dining set, the wedding photo hanging in the hallway, the hand-woven blanket her husband used every winter night. But only she was left. Evelyn found herself surrounded by people, yet the absence of familiar comforts made her feel isolated. After her husband's sudden death from a stroke, even the closest friends gradually stopped visiting. They didn't know what to say to a widow who hadn't laughed in years. Evelyn didn't blame them. She understood the awkwardness. People are afraid of sadness, afraid that someone else's pain might be contagious. She filled her days with quiet repetition. A cup of chamomile tea every afternoon, tending the backyard garden where lavender and hydrangeas bloomed under her careful hands, and rereading old favorite books in the armchair by the window. On Tuesdays, she volunteered at the town library, helping children learn to read, though words exchanged were few. But Evelyn found comfort in these routines, a kind of peace wrapped in predictability, untouched by surprise or chaos. Only at night, when darkness fell and every sound dissolved into stillness, would the emptiness truly settle in. During those moments, she often held their wedding photo, sitting quietly on the edge of her bed, smiling faintly. Sometimes, she thought she had grown used to being alone. Other times, her heart still wavered, like it had on the day she lost him. Most of her neighbors were young families or middle-aged professionals gone all day. She maintained a friendly rapport with them, just enough for morning greetings or a jar of homemade plum jam during the holidays. One of those neighbors was Andrew, the man who lived next door. They often exchanged pleasantries when Evelyn watered her plants or when Andrew took out the trash. She never thought much of him. To her, Andrew was part of the background, like the maple tree in her front yard or the familiar hum of the mail truck. But sometimes the things we consider ordinary hold the greatest surprises. Evelyn had no idea that within the stillness she had come to accept, something, or rather, someone, was quietly preparing to enter and shift her heart off its well-worn path. That evening, just as dusk settled in, a soft knock at the door startled Evelyn. She wasn't expecting anyone. Her house rarely had visitors, especially on a peaceful night like this. She wiped her hands on her apron and walked to the door. Standing on the porch was Andrew. Shirt slightly wrinkled, his expression a mix of worry and what looked like preparation for something important. "Hi, Evelyn," he said, voice low and slow as if afraid to disturb her. "I'm sorry for dropping by unannounced, but I have something to ask, if you have a moment." "Oh!" Yvonne blinked, surprised, but her tone stayed gentle. "Of course, come on in." Andrew stepped inside, standing awkwardly in the familiar living room he'd never entered before. Evelyn gestured toward the sofa. "Would you like some tea? I just made a pot of chamomile." He shook his head, eyes briefly drifting to the floor before returning to hers. "No, thank you. I won't take much of your time." The silence between them stretched a little until Andrew exhaled and began. "Evelyn, I know this might sound strange, and I know we're not exactly close enough for me to ask something like this, but I can't think of anyone else who might help." Evelyn tilted her head, curiosity rising. "What is it, Andrew?" "It's my sister, Sophie," he said, her name falling like a wound being touched. "She's recently gone through a challenging separation. She's staying with me for now, but honestly, I don't know how to help her." Evelyn felt something soften inside her. Heartache. She understood that better than anyone. Andrew went on, his voice dropping. "Sophie doesn't want to talk much, but I can tell she's shutting down. And I thought maybe you'd understand. A woman who's been through loss, who's had to find her way back. I've seen how you live, how you've carried on after your husband passed. You don't know how much that's inspired me." Evelyn gave a small smile, and not quite out of joy. "Andrew, I don't know what I've done to seem strong. I just kept going." "That's exactly it," he nodded. "The way you keep your routines, the kindness, the calm. I think if Sophie could see that, if you could talk to her, show her that there's another way to be, maybe just maybe she won't feel so alone." Evelyn went quiet. Something inside her had been touched, partly because of his words, but more because she saw herself in Sophie's story. The pain, the confusion, and the deep wish for someone to show you the way out. "You think I could help just by talking to her?" she asked, slowly. "I think just by being yourself," Andrew said honestly. "And if nothing changes, at least Sophie will know she's not the only one who's ever fallen apart." Evelyn looked at him for a long moment, then gave a soft nod. "All right, I'll meet her." Andrew's face visibly relaxed, as if a great weight had lifted. "Thank you, Evelyn, really, thank you." As he left, Evelyn's heart was still stirring. She didn't know what lay ahead, but maybe, just maybe that moment, Andrew's seemingly random request had begun to awaken a part of her heart that had been sleeping for far too long. Saturday morning sunlight spilled gently over the red brick path leading up to the porch. Evelyn was watering the lavender bushes when the doorbell rang, breaking the calm rhythm of the early day. She wiped her hands on the small towel draped over her basket and went to answer it. Standing in front of her was a young woman, long brown hair, slender frame, eyes that held both defiance and hurt. Sophie. She offered a faint smile, her gaze guarded and uncertain. "Hi, I'm Sophie," Andrew said. "I've been expecting you," Evelyn interrupted softly, opening the door wider. "Come in, Sophie. I've already made tea." Sophie stepped inside, hesitating just slightly, her eyes scanning the home with quiet surprise. It was warm, tidy, and carried a natural sense of peace. Something Sophie wasn't sure she'd felt since the divorce. At first, they made small talk, questions about tea, the weather, safe topics that didn't graze old wounds. Evelyn didn't press. She knew what it meant to not be ready to open up. She simply listened, offered more cookies, and allowed the silences between them to settle without discomfort. By late afternoon, as the sun began to retreat behind the trees, Sophie straightened her back, set her teacup down, and exhaled deeply. "I didn't think I'd say anything today, but there's something about you that makes me feel safe." Evelyn gave a slight nod, saying nothing, just waiting. "I feel like a failure," Sophie admitted, her eyes beginning to redden. "I gave everything to that marriage. I thought if I tried hard enough, sacrificed enough, he'd stay. But he said he felt overwhelmed, like he needed space. And that somehow I was part of what made it too hard to stay." Evelyn gently placed her hand over Sophie's. "Sometimes people leave not because we're not enough, but because they don't have the courage to stay." Sophie paused, her eyes welling up as emotions she'd long held back began to surface. Evelyn stayed beside her, offering quiet presence while Sophie released what she'd long held in. And when Sophie finally looked up, her eyes swollen but somehow clearer, Evelyn smiled gently. "You're not the first to feel lost, and you won't be the last. But you have every right to start over, not for anyone else, but for yourself." After that day, Sophie began visiting Evelyn more often, at first just a few times a week, then nearly every day. They cooked together, tended the garden, read books on the porch. Evelyn didn't teach or lecture. She simply shared about the days after her husband died, about the quiet loneliness no one noticed, and how she once believed she'd never feel joy again. That honesty helped Sophie slowly lower her guard. She began writing again, the first journal pages in years. She told Evelyn about her small dreams, a little coffee shop of her own, a solo trip, a life where she was at the center. And Evelyn, with her quiet strength and unwavering presence, became a reflection of what it meant for a woman to rise, not perfectly, but fully and truly live again. Thursday afternoon brought a light rain. Evelyn was gathering a few potted plants from the porch when a familiar car pulled up at the gate. Matthew stepped out, an umbrella in hand and a sheepish smile on his face. Hope I'm not interrupting. Sophie said you weren't feeling great today. I brought some apple pie, kind of a thank you from her, he said, his voice softer than usual. Evelyn was a little surprised but smiled. I'm not so tired I turned down apple pie. Come on in. They sat in the kitchen, where the scent of cinnamon and ginger from the fireplace blended with the faint smell of rain drifting in from the porch. The atmosphere was gentle, quiet, very different from their earlier hurried conversations. Matthew seemed more at ease, not completely relaxed, but like a man slowly learning not to hide behind responsibility. You've done something I couldn't, he said, turning the teacup gently in his hands. Sophie didn't talk to me for weeks, and now she's telling you everything. I'm grateful and maybe a little jealous. Evelyn rested her hand on the table, her gaze softening. Sophie needed a space where she didn't feel like she had to be strong, and I once needed that too. Maybe that's why she trusts me. Matthew nodded. You have a way of making people want to be honest. That comment made Evelyn pause for a moment. No one had ever said that to her before. They talked longer than either of them expected. About Sophie, about youth, about the things they'd lost and were still trying to hold on to. The empty spaces in Evelyn's life suddenly echoed, reflected in the man across from her, also trying to find himself through his sister's journey. Another evening, Matthew stopped by again, this time to borrow a book. Evelyn laughed when she saw him hesitating in front of the small bookshelf in the living room. They picked out a few old novels together, and by the time they realized, it was nearly midnight. It's strange. I've never talked to someone this long and not felt tired, Matthew said as he stood at the door to leave. The rain had stopped, leaving shimmering droplets along the porch railing. Maybe because neither of us is trying to be anyone else, Evelyn replied, not breaking her gaze. That moment lingered longer than usual, not an awkward silence, but the kind of stillness that happens when two people have nothing left to hide from each other. Day by day, they found a new rhythm. Matthew was no longer just Sophie's brother. He became a companion in afternoon gardening, weekend cooking, and long talks about the books they both loved. Evelyn began to look forward to the unexpected knocks at her door. Matthew brought homemade bread he just learned to bake, letters from Sophie in the city, or simply a well-timed hello. And then it was Evelyn who realized. She'd started to feel something she hadn't dared to touch in a very long time. One early autumn evening, the golden light of the setting sun poured through the living room window of Evelyn's home. On the table sat 2 glasses of red wine, a few slices of soft cheese, and a basket of crisp toasted bread Matthew had just brought over. Sophie had returned to the city weeks ago, but Matthew kept coming by like he no longer needed a reason. You know, Evelyn said, her eyes still fixed on the misted window pane. This thing between us started from something very small. Matthew looked up, gently turning his wine glass. A favor? No, a look, she replied, her voice soft. The first time you looked at me, not as a neighbor, but as someone you actually saw. He was quiet for a moment. Then he set his glass down, sat up straighter, his gaze steady on her face. Evelyn, I don't think I came here looking for anything beyond help. But being near you, I found myself. A breeze slipped through the window crack. Evelyn looked at him, feeling her heart quicken, not from nerves, but from the calm certainty in his words. There were no rushed promises, just clarity. Matthew, she whispered, I'm scared. He didn't flinch, so am I. Scared that if we start something, it won't turn out the way we hope, but if we don't, that scares me more. Matthew moved closer, sitting beside her on the linen-covered sofa. The room fell still, as if every sound were holding its breath, waiting for something important. Evelyn, he said, voice low and warm, I don't know what the future holds. I only know that every moment I get to sit beside you feels like a gift. She looked into his eyes. There were no fears left running in her chest, only the quiet certainty that this was a moment worth living fully, even if only for now. And then they leaned in. They shared a gentle moment, just a quiet acknowledgement of everything they'd both carried and slowly laid down between them, carrying all the things he hadn't dared to say. Evelyn closed her eyes, letting herself melt into it. Not because she felt young again, but because for the first time in years, she felt brave enough to begin. When they pulled apart, Evelyn said nothing. She simply took his hand and gave it a light squeeze. Matthew smiled, pressing a quiet kiss to the back of her hand. The next morning, Evelyn woke earlier than usual. She opened the window, letting the fresh air rush into the house. A voice called up from the porch. "Good morning." Matthew stood there with a bag of warm croissants. "Would you mind if I started my day with you?" Evelyn smiled. "No more you. Call me Evelyn." "I'm glad to start over, Evelyn," he said, his voice richer than the morning sun. "If you'll let me." She nodded, and in her heart, there was no fear now, just a new beginning. Simple, tender, not needing to be perfect, only real. Autumn passed gently, like the rustling of leaves beneath her shoes. Evelyn stood in the backyard garden, holding the old knitted scarf Matthew had given her for her birthday last week. It wasn't fancy, just a deep green with soft, simple yarn, but it had been made by his hands. And to Evelyn, every stitch was a quiet reminder that she was loved, not for her past, not for what she had lost, but simply for who she was. Matthew stepped out from the small kitchen, carrying 2 mugs of hot cocoa. "Are you cold?" he asked, his voice as light as the morning sun. Evelyn turned and smiled. "No, I was just thinking how long it's been since I felt this kind of peace." He handed her a cup and stood beside her. "Same here. Waking up every morning knowing you're still here, that's enough." Love came to Evelyn without the noise of her 20s. It didn't blaze like first desire. It burned steadily, warmly, through the smallest gestures, a held hand, a lingering glance, a dinner made together. Sophie, the young woman who had once arrived on Evelyn's doorstep in her darkest days, had since moved into her own apartment, found a new job, and was learning to love herself. Evelyn still checked in, sometimes with just a message, "How's today?" And Sophie always replied, "Better, because of you." One late afternoon, as the year drew to a close and snow began to fall gently, Matthew led Evelyn back to the wooden table on the porch, the same one where they had once watched the September sunset. On the table was a small box, no ribbon, no flowers, just a carefully folded letter beside it. "I didn't plan on making a big thing of this," Matthew said quietly, "but I think it's time." Evelyn opened the box. Inside was a delicate silver ring with a small inscription on the inside of the band. "Here, still." "I'm not asking for forever," he continued. "I just want to know that when I come home, you'll still be here. And I'll be here too." Evelyn didn't cry, but inside her, the frost built up over the years began to thaw into quiet, warming streams. "I don't know what the future looks like," she said, meeting his gaze. "But I know this. I don't want to keep walking without you." They didn't have a grand wedding, just an afternoon among close friends, a table draped in white linen, a few wild daisies, apple pie, and 2 glasses of wine. When they made their vows, Evelyn was no longer a woman living inside her memories. She was a woman choosing to live again, with all her hope, heartbreak, and love held openly in her hands. Life afterward wasn't perfect. There were days of small arguments, days of quiet distance for no reason at all. But every time, Matthew made the tea. Evelyn smiled again. And they learned how to love without gripping too tightly, only holding on long enough to stay. Once, a neighbor asked Evelyn, "Aren't you afraid to love again at your age?" Evelyn just smiled. "I'm not afraid to love. I'm afraid of missing the one person who's been right in front of me all along." Because true love doesn't ask you to forget the past. It teaches you how to love each other through it. Love can arrive in the most unexpected moments, even when we think our hearts have long been closed. But do you have the courage to open yours one more time, regardless of age, past scars, or the fear of getting hurt? Share your thoughts with me. Do you believe that late blooming love can still be as vibrant and genuine as it was in the beginning? This story deals with emotional healing and mature themes of grief and love. Viewer discretion is advised. I'd truly love to hear your thoughts, experiences, and stories in the comments below.